At the center, Kaylee's mysterious mother, Casey, who was arrested, charged, and eventually went on trial for the murder of her own daughter.
Hi, I'm Michael, and welcome back to Mysterious 7. I'm sharing 5 additional horrific cases of mothers across the United States who murdered their own children in cold blood. Without further ado, let's dive in. Number 1. China P. Arnold. China Arnold was born March 29, 1980, in Dayton, Ohio. She had previously been convicted of both abduction in 2000 and forgery in 2002. In August 2005, she and her children lived with her then-boyfriend, Terrell Talley, in a housing complex in Dayton. One day, an argument took place between the couple over their daughter Paris's paternity. There are conflicting accounts as to what triggered the event to occur, but soon into the argument, the 28-day-old Paris Talley was placed in a microwave oven for what experts estimate was over 2 minutes. Medical experts explained that the baby died after her temperature reached 107 to 108 degrees Fahrenheit. She appeared to have no external burns, but did suffer high-heat internal injuries at the time of her death. China and Terrell apparently separated into different rooms following the fight and woke the next day to Paris's cold and stiff body within the microwave, with burn marks on her body. They brought her to the hospital where she was pronounced dead on the scene. China told investigators that she had been intoxicated during the fight and did not remember what had happened the previous night or how her child got into the microwave. Arnold was promptly arrested. A medical examiner noted that the child's burns were on the front of her torso, limbs, and face because the heating element in Arnold's microwave was on the top. Dr. William Mader said that Arnold replied, "My baby's burned?" when asked if she knew how Talley had gotten the burns. A retired Dayton detective named Doyle Burke said investigators found a plastic bathtub with sediment at the bottom when they searched Arnold's apartment the day Talley died. "It looked like skin to me," he explained. Due to this, it's believed that she pulled her child out of the microwave, tried to bathe her to the point where her skin peeled off, and then waited to come up with a story before bringing her to the hospital. Arnold also apparently changed her version of events several times when speaking with police. When investigators asked Arnold where her 4 children were, she told them she had locked 3 of them upstairs and that the baby was with her father. While in jail awaiting trial, it's claimed that Arnold became sexually involved with her cellmate, a woman named Linda Williams. Williams later testified that Arnold had confessed to putting her daughter in the microwave and knowingly switching it on, due to the fear that Talley would leave her if he discovered that he was the baby's father. The attorney who represented Arnold at her first trial in February 2008, John Paul Ryan, claimed that she said she was intoxicated to the point of blacking out when the child died, and therefore could not assume responsibility. Also, shortly after this first trial began, Talley claimed his other son had told him that he pulled Paris's lifeless body out of the microwave after a neighbor's boy had put her inside, causing the judge to declare a mistrial. China was subsequently released due to a lack of evidence. China was rearrested in November of 2006. During the second trial, the mother of the child said to have placed the baby in the microwave testified in court. China Arnold was finally convicted of aggravated murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on September 8, 2008. She was incarcerated at the Dayton Correctional Institution. On November 5, 2010, the Ohio 2nd District Court of Appeals reversed Arnold's conviction, citing prosecutorial misconduct. They stated that the court made an error by not allowing material witnesses to testify in her defense. After her third and final trial on May 13, 2011, the jury once again found Arnold guilty of aggravated murder. Her attorney had argued that the evidence pointed as much to Talley as it did to her, but they failed to convince the jury of this. On May 20th of the same year, Arnold was sentenced to life in prison with parole, with both the jury and judge rejecting the death penalty option. China Arnold and her attorney have applied for many appeals, but all have been denied. Her family continues to campaign for her innocence. Number 2. Andrea Yates. We begin in a small suburb of Houston, Texas. There, Andrea Yates was born on the 2nd of July, 1964. Growing up, Andrea was known to be a studious girl with quite the thriving schedule. She earned the title of valedictorian of her graduating class and was a member of the National Honor Society. However, with all of this success came a flurry of issues that she struggled with privately. Andrea battled with bulimia and considered suicide multiple times in her younger years. These issues followed her closely throughout life and grew more dangerous. Andrea met Russell Yates while working as a registered nurse in 1989. Russell was the perfect match. He was also 25 and shared her deeply religious values. Things moved fast. They moved in together very soon after meeting and went on to marry in April 1993. The couple were widely known to have sworn to have as many children as nature would allow. Over the next 7 years of marriage, they had 4 boys and 1 girl, each named after a biblical figure. Noah, born in 1994, followed then by John, Paul, Luke, and Mary, who was born finally in the year 2000. There was trouble in paradise, though, as Andrea would fall into a more severe case of postpartum depression with each new child. This, along with her previous mental health struggles, brewed the perfect storm. In 1999, with the birth of her son Luke, she was finally prescribed trazodone for depression. But it didn't help that she had fallen down the rabbit hole of the skewed religious teachings of a man named Michael Woroniecki. Woroniecki was not a stranger, but an old college friend of Andrea Yates. He was an unaffiliated cleric, known to spew extreme and overly righteous teachings, and with Andrea's mental struggles worsening, she leaned more into these extreme teachings. It got so bad that by 1997, the Yates family moved into a 38-foot mobile camper van purchased from Woroniecki so she could be closer to him. It was then that Andrea made the choice to begin homeschooling all of her children within the camper. In June 1999, Andrea intentionally overdosed on her antidepressants, leaving her in a coma for 10 days. After she was released from the hospital in July, her husband Russell found her holding a knife to her throat, saying she wanted to die. Dr. Eileen Starbranch, a clinician assigned to Yates, said she found Yates to be among the 5 sickest patients she had ever seen, which appeared to drastically improve Yates's condition. She was exercising again, communicative, and even resumed a stable homeschooling schedule for her children. Psychiatrists strongly urged Andrea Yates not to have any more children due to her mental health issues, but she ignored their advice. Andrea gave birth to their final child, Mary, in November 2000. The family had, by then, moved out of the camper and bought a mid-sized home in Clear Lake, Texas. In March 2001, Andrea's father passed away, leading her to turn to Scripture once again for comfort. Despite her progress, her father's death might have been a trigger, as she began self-mutilating and often even refused to feed her daughter. She was hospitalized several times during this period, but the stays only resulted in unforeseeable recommendations for psych appointments. They left her in ruins and sent her back to her family. On June 3, 2001, Yates stopped taking her Haldol. Less than 3 weeks later, on the morning of June 20, 2001, Andrea's husband Russell Yates left for work at about 8:30 a.m. Worried to leave her with the children unattended, he had planned to have his mother, Dora Yates, come by the house and relieve Andrea of parenting duties about an hour later. By the time she arrived, it was already far too late. After saying goodbye to her husband as he went off to work, Andrea poured some bowls of cereal for her 4 boys. Following that, she took her 6-month-old Mary into the bathroom. She had already filled the bathtub with 9 inches of ice-cold water, and she proceeded to drown her, leaving her lifeless body in the tub. She then returned to the kitchen where her 4 boys were enjoying their cereal, clueless as to what had just happened. She then brought them into the bathroom to be killed. She went in order of age, starting with the youngest, drowning each in the same tub where Mary floated. Once dead, she lay their bodies on the bed side by side. Her eldest son Noah entered the bathroom last to see what was wrong, but tried to run when he saw his lifeless sister in the bathtub. Tragically, he could not outrun the determined Andrea. She decided to leave Noah's body in the tub instead and moved Mary's body onto the bed and in her brother John's arms. Yates calmly grabbed the phone and called the police multiple times, but refused to give any further detail as to why. She then called Russell, telling him that he needed to return home. Once arrested, she confessed without resistance, truly believed that killing them saved them from hell, and that only her execution for killing them would defeat Satan on earth. She even admitted to planning the murders in advance. She waited for her husband to leave the house, then she sent the dog to the nearby kennel for the day. There was no stopping her from quote-unquote saving her children. A family friend hired attorney George Parnham to defend her. In 2000, during the 3-week trial following the murders, Yates's attorneys pushed heavily for an insanity plea to save her from execution. Under Texas law, however, one must be able to prove that they were completely incapable of telling right from wrong at the time of the crime. If her team failed to do so, that would lead to a guilty verdict for the capital murder of her children. While prosecutor Kaylin Wilford sought the death penalty, jurors were unconvinced that Yates met the criterion. They sentenced Andrea Yates to life in prison with eligibility for parole after 2041. In a shocking revelation, in 2005, an appeals court discovered that false testimony by an expert for the prosecution had tainted the 2002 trial. It turns out that jurors at the time had been told that Yates had likely seen an episode of Law & Order in which a mother who drowned her children was found not guilty by claiming insanity. Upon further research, it was found that no such episode of the show existed. Because of this, Yates was granted a new trial, where she was declared not guilty by reason of insanity. She was resentenced to remediation instead of jail time, with her new home being the Kernville State Hospital, a low-security mental health facility in Texas. Andrea's eligibility for release comes up for review every year. Each year, Andrea Yates waives the right. It's a delusion that she probably wouldn't have had she not met Rowan Yeckes, Russell said publicly following the trial. But certainly they didn't cause the delusion. The illness caused the delusion, he added. The Bible says the devil prowls around looking for someone to devour. I look at Andrea, and I think that Andrea was weak, and he attacked her. Texas law dictates that the court has jurisdiction over her from within the mental health hospital for as long as her prison sentence would have been. In her case, that's the rest of her natural life. It was the seventh deadly sin, said Andrea Yates from within prison. My children weren't righteous. They stumbled because I was evil. The way I was raising them, they could have never been saved. They were doomed to perish in the fires of hell. Susan Smith. This woman is one of the most notorious prisoners in South Carolina's history. Susan Smith had a home life that was anything but stable growing up. Her father committed suicide when she was just 6 years old, and Smith herself even attempted suicide at age 13. Her mother remarried soon after this attempt to a man named Beverly Russell, a member of the local chapter of the Christian Coalition. Shockingly, he was later revealed to have molested Smith throughout her teenage years, with one source even claiming that the sexual abuse between them had continued until just shy of 6 months before the murders to come took place. After graduating from high school in 1989, Smith found herself in a relationship with a married man. She made a second attempt to kill herself once he decided to end their illicit affair. Soon, she ended up marrying a man named David Smith, and the pair had 2 sons together. Although loving in the beginning, the relationship had its challenges as mutual allegations of infidelity ran rampant, causing them to separate and get back together many times. On October 25, 1994, Smith, who was 23 years old at the time, told police in a frantic 911 call that she had been carjacked by a black man who had taken off, not realizing that her 2 young sons were in the back seat. For 9 straight days, she made tearful pleas on national television for her children's safe return. Detectives did not believe Smith's story from the start, assuming, based on her behavior in interviews, that she had in fact murdered her own sons. 2 days into the investigation, Susan and David Smith were subjected to a standard polygraph test. She gave another description of the carjacking location, claiming that a traffic light she approached turned red, causing her to stop, and gave the perpetrator the opportunity to approach her car for the robbery. It was quickly determined that the light was programmed not to turn red for a vehicle at her point of the intersection, unless another vehicle was present on the intersecting road, conflicting with her statement that she saw no cars at the intersection when the carjacking took place. As interviews by police grew more exploratory, Smith's story began to crumble, as did she, under the pressure of keeping it up. Eventually, she admitted that there was actually never a carjacker at all. On November 3, 1994, Susan Smith confessed. She had driven to the nearby John D. Long Lake, got out of the driver's seat, and let her car roll slowly into the water. Her 3-year-old son Michael and 14-month-old son Alex were still strapped in their car seats, unable to save themselves. Investigators had actually started to search the nearby lakes and ponds as of day 2 of the investigation, including John D. Long Lake, where the children's bodies were eventually found. Initial water searches did not locate the car at the bottom because the police believed it wouldn't have drifted past 30 feet off the shore, Deciding not to search past that point, the car was eventually found a whopping 122 feet from the shore. Her motive was simple. She was secretly dating a wealthy local man named Tom Finlay, who soon before the murders ended their relationship because he did not want children. During the trial, Susan claimed no real motive and no pre-planning the murders. She said she was simply not in the right state of mind following her breakup. With the case quickly becoming international news, Smith was convicted of 2 counts of murder. She is currently serving a life sentence at Leith Correctional Institution in Greenwood, South Carolina. She is notorious at the prison, both for her heinous crimes as well as her behavior behind bars. She often incurs disciplinary actions, gets caught with drugs, self-mutilates, and has been charged with having sexual contact with a prison guard. Now 50 years old, she has told her long-distance boyfriend in letters that she wants to marry him if she's ever freed from jail, to quote-unquote leave the past mistakes behind her and start fresh, just you and me. Diane Downs was born on August 7, 1955 in Phoenix, Arizona. Outwardly, she appeared to have a very normal yet conservative childhood. Behind closed doors, however, she was being molested by her father. It's unclear if her mother knew of the abuse or not, but she certainly wished to keep up the family image of a normal, happy family. In high school, Diane was known to dress provocatively and exclusively dated older boys. One of these boys was Stephen Downs, an adventurous older guy who was always looking for fun. He and Diane became joined at the hip, causing trouble together. The two would graduate from Moon Valley, but life tore them apart briefly as Diane chose to enroll at Pacific Coast Baptist Bible College in Orange, California, with Steve choosing to enlist in the U.S. Navy as his path instead. Downs was soon expelled a year later from PCBBC after what was described as promiscuous behavior. She reunited with Stephen back in Arizona, tying the knot on November 13, 1973. Pretty much immediately, their relationship began to fall apart. They regularly argued about financial issues and alleged infidelities on both sides. They brought their 3 children, Christy, Cheryl Lynn, and Stephen, Daniel, or Danny, into the world in the midst of these marital woes, with each being born in 1974, 1976, and 1979, respectively. By the time their final child was born, their main arguments were about infidelity, and had become so intense that Steve became convinced that Danny wasn't his biological son. Incapable of reconciling, the couple finally divorced in 1980. The then 25-year-old divorcee, Diane, tried hard to become a surrogate to other mothers, but failed her psychiatric tests twice, citing signs of psychosis. Now on her own, Diane Downs became increasingly negligent of her children. She often left them with her parents or ex-husband without much notice, and was quite indifferent about whether she even saw them or not. They were often seen unkept in public, sometimes even appearing malnourished. She would regularly leave her oldest daughter, Christy, in charge of her other 2 kids when the girl was only 6 years old. She was seemingly more interested in the affection of men rather than focusing her attention on her young children. In 1981, she met Robert Nick Knickerbocker and embarked on an illicit whirlwind affair. The married man saw Diane's kids as baggage. He often told Downs that he had no interest in being a daddy and eventually ended the affair. Just 2 years later, in April of 1983, Diane Downs had now moved her and her children to Springfield, Oregon, holding down a steady job as a postal worker. On May 19, 1983, she drove very slowly to the nearby hospital, claiming that a bushy-haired stranger had assaulted her and her kids during a carjacking attempt. 7-year-old Cheryl was pronounced dead at the scene. 3-year-old Danny was left paralyzed from the waist down, and 8-year-old Christy suffered a stroke that impaired her speech. Authorities initially believed Downs' claims, as she herself had been shot in the arm, but her behavior soon revealed more to the story. Not one tear, Dr. Stephen Wilhite, who treated them, said. You know, she just asked, "How is she doing?" Not one emotional reaction. She says things to me like, "Boy, this has really spoiled my vacation," and "That really ruined my new car. I got blood all over the back of it." I knew within 30 minutes of talking with that woman that she was guilty. Diane's downfall was her daughter, Christy, recovering enough to speak to authorities. When she was asked who shot her, she simply replied, "My mom." She further revealed that on that fateful day, Diane Downs drove her children down Old Mohawk Road, just outside of town. She pulled over to the side of the road, turned around and shot each of her kids with a .22 caliber pistol. She then shot herself in the arm and drove at a snail's pace to the hospital, hoping for them to be dead upon arrival. When confronted, Downs stated that she didn't even own a gun, but a simple search warrant revealed otherwise. Police had found her diary, which was filled with references to her relationship with Knickerbocker and his adverse thoughts about the relationship and her kids. A witness came forward who saw her driving abnormally slow down the road towards the hospital, only furthering suspicions. Diane Downs was arrested on February 28, 1984, 9 months after the shooting. She was charged with 1 count of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder and criminal assault. She was quickly sentenced to life in prison, where psychiatrists diagnosed Downs with narcissistic, histrionic, and antisocial personality disorders, as well as being a deviant sociopath. Downs' 2 surviving children eventually went on to be adopted in 1986 by the lead prosecutor on the case and his wife, Fred and Joanne Hugie. Between the murders and her sentencing, Downs became pregnant with a 5th child, a girl whom she named Amy Elizabeth. 10 days before Downs' sentencing, Amy was seized by the state of Oregon and adopted by Chris and Jackie Babcock, who renamed her Rebecca. Years later, Rebecca would appear on many public TV networks, speaking on her monster of a mother. Christy Downs, Diane's child, who spoke out against her in court, suffers from a speech handicap due to injuries sustained during the shooting. She gave birth to a son and a daughter, the latter whom she named Cheryl, in memory of her late sister. Number 5. Casey Anthony. Casey Anthony was born in 1986. Her daughter, Kaylee Anthony, was born in Orlando, Florida in 2005. There she lived with her mother and her maternal grandparents, George and Cindy Anthony. According to her father, Casey left the family home on June 16, 2008, taking 2-year-old Kaylee with her. She reportedly did not return for 31 days. Cindy asked her daughter repeatedly during this time to see Kaylee, but Casey always had an excuse why she couldn't see her granddaughter. This included that Kaylee was with a nanny named Zenaida, or Zanny, Fernandez Gonzalez. A woman with that same name did, in fact, exist, but it turned out she did not know the Anthonys at all or anyone affiliated with them. Casey's father eventually learned that Casey's car had been towed, and he went to recover it. Upon approaching the vehicle, both he and the yard attendant noted a very strong smell coming from the trunk. Both of them thought it smelled like a decomposing body, but when the trunk was open, it only held a bag of trash. On July 15, 2008, Kaylee was finally reported missing in a frantic 911 call made by her grandmother, Cindy, who explained to the operator that she had not seen Kaylee for 31 days. She said that Casey had given a variety of explanations as to Kaylee's whereabouts before finally telling her that she had not seen Kaylee for weeks. Sounding distraught, Cindy said, "There is something wrong. I found my daughter's car today, and it smells like there's been a dead body in the damn car." Casey Anthony continuously lied to detectives, telling them Kaylee had been kidnapped by a nanny on June 9th, and that she had been trying to find her all on her own because she was frightened to alert the authorities. Casey told investigators that she was working at Universal Studios, another lie that she had also been telling her parents for years. Investigators took Casey to Universal Studios on July 16, 2008, the day after Kaylee was reported missing, and asked her to show them her office. Casey led detectives around the building for about 25 minutes before she stopped, cracked a grin, and admitted that she had no office there, as she had been fired from there years before. Officials at one point released records of Google searches for the terms neck breaking and how to make chloroform on a computer accessible to Casey around the time of Kaylee's death. A strand of hair was also recovered from the trunk of Casey's car, which was microscopically similar to hair from Kaylee's hairbrush. The strand showed root banding, which is where hair roots form a dark band on them after death. This placed a dead body in the trunk, or at least in the vicinity of the vehicle. Casey Anthony was arrested in October 2008 on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated child abuse, aggravated manslaughter of a child, and 4 counts of providing false information to police. She pleaded not guilty. However, due to conflicting evidence and the inability to prove guilt without a reasonable doubt, the jury acquitted her of the most serious charges against her. Her family responded after the verdict by saying, "While the family may never know what has happened to Kaylee Marie Anthony, they now have closure for this chapter of their life. They will now begin the long process of rebuilding their lives." Despite the baseless defense chosen by Casey Anthony, the family believes that the jury made a fair decision based on the evidence and testimony presented and the rules that were given to them by Judge Perry. On December 11, 2008, 2-year-old Kaylee's skeletal remains were found wrapped in a blanket inside of a laundry bag in a heavily wooded area near the Anthony family home. Reports claim that there was either duct tape found near the front of her skull or on the mouth of the skull. This led the medical examiner, Dr. Jan Garavaglia, better known as Dr. G, to confirm duct tape as one reason the death should be considered a homicide. The official cause had to eventually be deemed death by undetermined means. And there we have it. It's truly shocking to know how many cases there are where a mother can brutally end the life of their own child, and for such selfish reasons. It's heartbreaking to know that these young victims were never given a shot at life. Go ahead and share your thoughts on these shockingly vile cases in the comments section. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more episodes covering crimes on Mysterious 7. Stay safe out there, friends. Until next time.